The flight from London to America was nothing out of the ordinary, at least, not for the passengers or the crew. The passengers settled into their seats, lost in their own worlds. But there was one person who stood out among them, a young black man, dressed casually but with an unmistakable aura of confidence. His name was Jaden. To the untrained eye, he could have been just another passenger. But there was something different about him. No one could have predicted what happened that day. Before we start, please like the video and subscribe my channel. The flight attendant, Melissa, noticed him the moment he boarded the plane. She couldn't help but stare as he approached the gate with a boarding pass in hand. His appearance seemed out of place to her. His clothes were simple, nothing flashy or expensive. It was clear to her that he was just another poor kid trying to escape his life for a while. Melissa's eyes narrowed as she watched Jaden. She had seen him before, or someone who looked like him, but she didn't take the time to care. All she knew was that he didn't belong in the seat assigned to him, the seat reserved for the wealthier passengers. She'd been working for years and knew exactly how things worked. Rich families sat in the front, while others sat at the back. As Jaden took his seat, Melissa's disapproval deepened. She made a snap judgment, and something within her stirred. He doesn't belong here, she thought. She had never hidden her feelings about people like him, those who seemed out of place in the world of wealth and luxury. Little did she know, this encounter would set off a chain of events that no one, not even Jaden, could foresee. As the plane ascended into the sky, Jaden settled into his seat, completely unaware of the eyes that followed him. He closed his eyes, pretending to relax, but his mind was elsewhere. He was used to people staring at him, judging him based on his appearance or his background. It had happened all his life. Melissa, on the other hand, was far from indifferent. She had been watching him for a while now, and with each passing minute, her disdain grew. Her gaze lingered on him as she moved through the aisles, serving drinks to the other passengers. It wasn't the way she treated anyone else. She could tell he wasn't rich, and there was something in her gut that told her he didn't belong. She approached him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she said coldly, "but you'll need to adjust your seat. This row is reserved for first-class passengers. I'm sure you understand." Jaden was caught off guard. He hadn't done anything wrong, but Melissa's tone was sharp, and the way she looked at him made it clear that she thought he didn't belong there. "What?" Jaden asked, surprised by the hostility. But Melissa was already moving on, her back turned to him. She knew he wouldn't argue, and her mind was already set. But something in her words had hit a nerve. Jaden glanced around. No one seemed to care. The atmosphere on the plane shifted, and Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, but she didn't care. As far as she was concerned, Jaden was an anomaly. Someone who didn't fit the rules of the world she knew. She stopped by Jaden's seat again. This time, her voice was louder, more assertive. "You really should be sitting somewhere else. This seat is for people like you to feel comfortable, not for someone who doesn't fit in," she said, her words dripping with condescension. Jaden stared at her. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes spoke volumes. "I belong here just as much as anyone else," his gaze seemed to say. But Melissa wasn't ready to listen. The words that followed were cruel. "You're just a poor boy. Your clothes don't even meet our airline's standards. And I'm afraid you'll need to move." Jaden clenched his fists, trying to control his temper. This wasn't the first time he had been treated like this. But there was something different about this moment. Something that made him feel smaller, even though he was a star in his own right. And as she walked away, the seed of something larger began to grow, a confrontation that neither of them was ready for. Minutes passed, but the tension remained. It was thick in the air, palpable. Jaden, still seated in his place, could hear Melissa's footsteps coming toward him again. This time, she had a new approach. She was standing in front of him now, a smug look on her face. "You'll need to move, or I'll have security escort you. This is an airline rule, and you're clearly not following it," she snapped. Jaden was done. Enough was enough. He stood up, a calm yet firm expression on his face. "I don't need to move, and I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice cool but full of authority. The surrounding passengers held their breath. They weren't sure what to make of the situation. Some watched with curiosity, while others glanced at their phones, pretending they hadn't noticed. But Melissa wasn't backing down. Her face flushed with anger. "You don't have a choice, mister," she spat, her hands tightening into fists. "You can't treat me like this. You'll see what happens next," Jaden said, not willing to back down from her cruelty. As the argument between Jaden and Melissa escalated, the flight attendants began to whisper among themselves. The tension had reached a boiling point. Melissa, in her arrogance, wasn't backing down. But neither was Jaden. This wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about respect. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, Melissa snapped her fingers and signaled to the plane's security. "Take care of him," she muttered. Before Jaden could react, 2 burly security guards approached him. The passengers held their collective breath as the scene unfolded. But Jaden wasn't the type to back down. With a swift movement, he stood up straight and stared down the security guards. The situation was getting worse, and it was becoming more and more obvious that something was going to happen. Jaden wasn't just some quiet, intimidated passenger. He wasn't going to let someone insult him without consequences. Just when it seemed like the situation would spiral out of control, something unexpected happened. Jaden, who had been calm up until now, did something that no one could have predicted. With a swift motion, he ripped off his jacket. Underneath, a custom designer shirt was visible, emblazoned with the logo of a well-known fashion brand. It was clear now that Jaden wasn't the poor, out-of-place person Melissa had assumed. The gasps from the surrounding passengers were loud enough for everyone to hear. The same flight attendant who had mocked Jaden was now facing the consequences of her own arrogance. Melissa's face turned pale. She had misjudged him, and the world around her was shifting. Seconds later, the tension was broken by an announcement over the PA system. The voice was crisp and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disturbance. Please be advised that the young man in seat 23A is the new owner of this airline." There was a collective gasp from the passengers. Jaden, the same boy they had seen humiliated and shamed just moments ago, was now revealed to be the owner of the entire airline. The realization hit the passengers like a ton of bricks. Jaden wasn't just some random person. He was the one they should have been respectful to from the beginning. The entire cabin fell into stunned silence. Melissa, who had been so confident in her superiority, now stood at the center of a very different reality. Her judgment had been cruel, and now she had to face the music. Passengers began to murmur among themselves, some still shocked by the revelation. Others were pulling out their phones, eager to document the dramatic turn of events. It didn't take long for some passengers to recognize Jaden. He was a famous American rapper, actor, and entrepreneur, a name that had been on everyone's lips for years. But now, in this moment, he wasn't the star. He was someone who had been disrespected, and the world was watching. Melissa, now visibly shaken, walked toward Jaden. Her eyes were downcast, filled with regret. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know. I should have never treated you like that." But Jaden wasn't angry. His calmness was unnerving. "You should learn not to judge people based on their appearance," he replied softly. "Just because someone doesn't look like they have money doesn't mean they're poor. We're all the same." Security stood quietly by, observing the scene as the passengers watched, many of them feeling guilty for not intervening earlier. As the plane began its final descent, the tension that had gripped the cabin slowly began to dissipate. Jaden sat quietly, his earlier calmness now a source of quiet strength. Melissa, standing at the front, was no longer the confident, superior flight attendant from earlier. The revelation of Jaden's true identity had shattered her judgment and left her reflecting on her actions. When the plane touched down, Melissa approached Jaden, her steps tentative. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small. "I shouldn't have treated you like that. I misunderstood." Jaden, ever the larger person in the moment, smiled softly. "It's okay," he replied. "But remember, it's never about what someone wears or where they sit. We're all more than that." The apology wasn't just for him. It was for everyone she had ever judged unfairly. As the passengers began to disembark, many looked at Jaden with newfound respect, some even asking for autographs. But Jaden didn't need the praise. He knew the real change had already happened. Melissa's lesson had been hard-earned, but in that moment, the flight had become something more. A reminder that true worth isn't seen in clothes or status. It's in the respect we give one another.